everyone, and welcome to our week 3 of Summer Interview Bootcamp by ChampAmerica. And today, I have the honor of having Miss Andrea Bellateri as our guest speaker, and we'll ask her to introduce herself in a little bit. But for today's session, we're going to focus on your leadership skills, or how we talk about leadership skills in your interviews. Most importantly, why people even care about your leadership skills and what constitutes as leadership skills. And we're going to walk you through 3 examples. They're commonly asked in those interviews. There's a little bit of twist that we'll sort of analyze the differences of each question, and we'll give you some real examples of our students to help you understand what's a good way to sort of organize your answers. So the 3 questions we're going to talk about are going to be, number 1, give me an example of your leadership skills, plain vanilla, the way of asking. Number 2, describe your leadership style. And then number 3 is, have you failed as a leader, and what did you do, or what did you learn through the experience? Okay, so let's move ahead. Andrea, really happy to have you today. Do you want to do a quick intro of yourself?
Sure. My name is Andrea Bellateri. I am the Director of FSO Knowledge Exchange. My background is financial services. Primarily, I've worked for companies like Credit Suisse and Morgan Stanley, mainly in an accounting function. That's my background. The controller's area, securities lending for both of those organizations. In 2003, I kind of shifted roles just based on life. My daughter was born, and I just needed a career change that was more accommodating for my schedule, her schedule, and my schedule. So I kind of moved into a marketing role, business development. I worked in the medical field for 11 years doing business development and marketing. And in 2012, I joined FSO Knowledge Exchange, where I was responsible for events, collaborating speakers and industry folks, getting them together for the exchange of ideas, what's the latest in financial services. And I've been working for FSO and Turtle Bay. It was actually, the company was acquired by Turtle Bay in 2012. And my role has evolved. Of course, I'm doing a lot more these days, but I'm still in the financial service sector. I love it because I'm getting involved in what's the latest and greatest in financial services problems and successes. So I'm happy to be here and offer any advice that I can that would be helpful to the attendees.
That's interesting. I don't think I ever heard your sort of like your background in an entire So I know you have experience in financial services and marketing, and just like hearing the whole history of it is really impressive. So
yeah, thank you.
Great to have you here. So guys, I see a couple of you that dialed in. Welcome. A little recap of what we talk about the last 2 weeks. Week 1, this is our 3rd week. Week 1, we talk about self-introduction. Right? How do you leave a positive impression in front of your interviewer, ideally within the first 30 seconds. So that was week 1. Then week 2, we talked about, give me an example of your projects, right? Example of this, example of that, your analytical skills. How did you solve a problem, manage a conflict? That it was last week when we introduced a STAR method. So STAR method is really just a way to organize your story to show some clarity. So that means you need to talk about the situation, right? What's the context of the story, right? What was the task, right? Specifically, what were your tasks? And then the actions, right? What did you do in order to solve that problem? And then talk about results, right? What did you accomplish, and what did you learn from that experience? So when we apply STAR method, we're going to follow 2 steps. Number 1 is, for every experience, right? Whether it's leadership or anything else, you're going to try to organize your stories based on the STAR method, right, to show the situation, task, action, and result. And then you're going to find what are the things that is the qualities that have reflected about you, whether it's your leadership skills, communication skills, adaptability, quick learner, and then link these to the job requirement. So keeping that in mind, we're going to move into leadership, right? So Andrea, and I'm going to just come back to this leadership. And especially for someone like you who's been in finance, marketing, and also worked in companies large and small, I feel like in every interview that people are going to ask something about leadership skills, right? In your interviews, both as interviewer and someone being interviewed, you always experience that, right?
Of course, they're trying to get to know you. They want to know what your capabilities are. So they're always looking for examples, as you said, what is the situation? How do you address it? What did you do? What did you find successful or unsuccessful?
Yeah. So, and I think in the workplace today, leadership qualities are even more important, right? There's a lot of global collaboration, right? Companies have outsourced quite a bit, sometimes even or offshore, near shore outsourced. So if you're sitting in a company, you don't always just work with your colleagues. Sometimes you're working with vendors sitting on the other side of the globe, right? When I was at JP Morgan, we used to have our team in New York was very small, but a significantly larger team was actually sitting in India, Mumbai, India. So that's a bigger team you have to work with, and you have to lead these people while you've never met them before, right? And it's also even within, say, in New York or major cities, the team background, cultural background is more diverse, right? So people think differently. They're motivated by different factors. And then the other thing I found really interesting is technology changing business processes, right? So you have to, one, be very adaptive. You have to learn quickly. And the other is, like in the past, I probably haven't experienced a lot of that. You have to write reports, right? Type of physical reports. I don't think I experienced much of that, but there was email, right? And then it involved right now when you work, it's a lot of texting, right? Internal messaging, right? So you work as a leader and bring everyone together is just, it's important. And not to—
Yes, communication is key, both written and oral speaking. Very, very, very key. It's the most important thing.
Totally. And then in a stressful work environment, right? So I think leadership, it's even more of a quality that people need to pay attention to. So what is leadership skills? I think it could be a lot of things, right? And we just throw in some things that are top on our mind that we can share, right? Communication, decision-making, motivating, empowerment, right? Delegating and taking responsibilities, empathy, right? Trustworthiness, commitment, all these things are qualities of leadership. So what we're trying to say is you don't have to always talk about leading a big project, right? An important project, right? That is one aspect of leadership, but there are so much more to being a leader, right? And like Andrea just said, communication, that's a huge, like big thing, right? To be a good leader, you really need to be able to communicate, right? Convey the message, solve problems, right? And manage conflicts and different work styles. So yeah. Now, in this, you might find this to be funny, Andrea, but leadership talk is always the Achilles heel for Chinese students. And because I think we're brainwashed growing up, right? Culturally, there's more focus on being humble, and you should always learn, right? And when you're too young, it's almost not good to talk about yourself as a leader. It's more of a respectful follower. So that's kind of the culture that we grew up in. And there's also another thing that people feel like, I haven't learned enough. I'm not strong technically. Hence, who am I to be the leader? But I think in reality, it's quite the opposite, right? Your ability to learn or the position you're thrown in is not always determined by your age or how much you know, right? There's situations that require you to step up and help the company or help your team grow. And everyone should take on that role, not necessarily how much you know, how long you worked here. Right?
Yes, I think that's the expectation in every role, no matter from junior to senior level. There's always a leadership aspect that's expected. I remember when I worked at Morgan Stanley, that was one of my first positions, and they told me that the main thing is everyone is expected to do their job perfectly and to do their job, everything, what you were, hired to do, that's the expectation that's a given. But you always need to go above and beyond that expectation. And leadership is key to that. They want to see that, that you're willing to take a little bit of a risk, you're willing to come out of the comfort zone of the role, and that's what they're looking to gauge when they're speaking to you, to see how you can communicate that and how you would approach any of the opportunities that may come about in order to make your role more productive.
Right. So if you want the company to grow, if you want your team to grow, you need to have people that can not only grow, but also lead others, right, to follow the same goal. So this is why, guys, leadership, there's nothing to be embarrassed about, right? It is a necessary skill, a very important and necessary skill that people, employers in America would focus on often. So common answers on leadership given by my students. And I have this picture here, which is always what I hear, okay? And funny enough, it actually follows the STAR method. So I'll tell you what is a typical answer that I hear. And for a lot of you listening right now or who's gonna watch, and I bet most of you had some kind of story like this. So I am the vice president or treasurer of the Chinese Student and Scholar Association at my university. And the task is we were organizing the Chinese New Year Gala at our school. And it's always like Spring Festival, Chinese New Year, always something like this. And what's the problem we encountered? One member didn't want to contribute. So how did you solve that problem? I talked to him privately, and the result was he changed. We had a successful project, and it was a great party. Everyone was happy, right? So there's a couple of things to this, is that when I was an interviewer, especially the last couple of years at Berkeley, we interview students. It's almost like every Chinese student I interviewed come up with a story like this. So even my colleagues who were also interviewing would say, hey, Heather, what is this CASA thing? Why is every Chinese person like a CASA member? So obviously it's a Chinese Student Association, but I think the one thing it reflects about you is you're not really stepping out of your comfort zone, right? So you're a Chinese student, there's nothing wrong to be an active member of that society, but it's also when everyone's doing that, it shows that you're not reaching out, you're not doing something more interesting or assimilating with the rest of the world, right? And then if you are, you do feel like this is a good story for you, I always want to say, try to really develop the story to showcase your leadership skills, right? Especially, okay, one member didn't want to contribute. Why didn't he want to contribute, right? Was it the task that you assigned to him wasn't the right thing for him? Did he have sort of encountered difficulties that he didn't know how to solve? Or was there any other issues, right? You have to talk about why and how did you discover the why, right? So this is where when you say, I talked to him privately, that could really be enriched quite a bit, right? Did that reflect you as an empathetic leader, a listener, right? Did you delegate more effectively? Did you support your team, empower your team, right? There's a lot of good quality material that you can really work into the story, right? Otherwise, if you just give me this story the way it is, I'm really gonna fall asleep, right? And honestly, I don't wanna hear another story like this. Okay, so when we look at leadership, and using that previous story as an example, is leadership is really not about title. And I think Andrea alluded to that earlier as well is even junior or senior, everyone need to perform well and be able to grow and take the team grow. And it doesn't matter if you have a title, right? That is just a quality that you should have. It doesn't have to be limited to school or work. Your life leadership experiences, your community involvement, competition, sports, all are good material. In a little bit, we're going to give you an example of life leadership, which I think it's one of the best answers I heard in my years as an interviewer. So I didn't have the exact script, but I kind of always remember that story. So I'm going to share with you guys in a little bit. And then again, it doesn't have to be like always a winning project, right? You have to just showcase how you lead, manage, and even failures sometimes can teach you important lessons, right? So it doesn't always have to be like winning.
That's very important, not to be afraid to fail, because you'll never better yourself, and you'll never, you have to be willing to take certain risks in order to be more successful and to learn. Most of the things that I learned at work came through failures or things that didn't work, because then you can improve on them, and that's how you make changes that are more impactful.
Right. And it is true that you don't fail now, or say for you guys, most of you guys are in your 20s, right? Fail small and fail early, and that's going to help you in life later on. You don't want to.
It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable as you get older. It's more acceptable now because they kind of give you a little bit of a pass, if you will. So,
right. And then
yes, that is true.
Bounce back a lot easier, right? You don't want to be someone, when you're a VP and then you fail, then it's not that you can't bounce back, but I just think the pressure is going to be so much more on you, right? Your peers, and that could really make a big difference on your career compared to, say, now when you're in school or your first or second year out of college. So it's a good time to fail. Just try not to make the same mistake twice, right? Okay. And then behavioral questions about leadership, right? They're just like we talk about introduce yourself versus walk me through your resume or why you're a good candidate. There's many variations of this question. It's talking about the same thing, but come with a small twist. So, for example, the plain vanilla way would be, give me an example of your leadership, right? But it could also be, tell me a time that you took the lead on a difficult project, right? So if you hear the word difficult project, you probably need to present the challenges, right, in a more clear way, and specifically how you overcome the challenge. Tell me about a time that you lead an important meeting. So then that's going to be specifically on meeting, right? Focus on the meeting and don't run away with a long story that's not relevant. Have you been on a project where you delegated effectively? So that's talking about delegation, probably managing timeline, right? And holding people accountable. Describe a time when you lead by example, right? Very clear. How did you become a role model, right? Have you coached or mentored others to achieve success? And this is talking about you being someone to empower others and help others grow by coaching and mentoring. What is your leadership style, right? So are you someone that always builds consensus, right? Or are you someone leading by facts or leading by example? Who is the leader that you admire most? So I had to pause a little bit when I was preparing this question, right? And I really think, so maybe a good thing to do is, while you're not in an interview, think about a person that you can relate, right? What do you like about that person? So I'll give you an example. I asked myself, and I had to, I didn't have an answer immediately, but then a couple of days later when I was listening to podcasts, I was like, wait a minute, Michael Bloomberg, I like this guy. Right, so I was listening to his graduation commencement speech at Harvard Business School recently, and he talked about how he is an ethical leader, right? And he learned that from other people that he admired. So that value is very much consistent with mine. So I feel like if someone asked me that question, that could be something, that could be a good answer, right? Obviously, you have to develop that answer a little bit But the point being, don't have those moments in your interview. Just prepare a little ahead of time, because sometimes answers don't come to you right away. You do have to let it come naturally. And then last but not least, have you failed as a leader that we talk about, and what did you learn through the experience? So here you need to talk about failure, and we find an example for you through our student. Okay, so how do you answer that? This is basically just saying, and I know, Andrea, you can read all that, but it's to apply the START method, right? Look for the job description, right? What kind of leadership quality they're hoping, right? And those should all be hidden in the job description. Are they looking for people that can work with cross-functional, cross-regional teams, right? Those people who can learn quickly, adapt quickly, right? So all these keywords, and use the START method to organize your stories, and then find the keywords that are relevant to the job in question. Keywords, I think this is a bit repetitive from an earlier page. So I think just make sure it's not all about managing, delegating. There are other aspects of leadership that you can emphasize on. So let's move on to examples. And Andrea, I'm just gonna read it, right? And we can talk about your feedback after, okay? So give me an example of your leadership role. And I mentioned earlier, this is one of my favorite examples or favorite answers that I heard over the years. So this student, he said, being the oldest of 5 siblings in my family, I learned to be a leader from a very young age. And I have taken on that role in my everyday life for the past 20 plus years, right? I always help my parents take care of my younger siblings and help with things in the house. I remember being 10 years old and helping 3 of my younger siblings with their homework at night and ensure that they complete their school assignment for the day. This also taught me 2 important things about leadership. 1, it's important that you lead by example. I had no choice but to be an independent hard worker. I excelled in school and had great grades, and I was also on my high school baseball team. As such, I became the role model for my brothers and sisters, and they wanted to do well in school as well. And 2, leadership is about sacrifice. There were many times that I did not get to hang out with my friends and do what my peers were doing on weekends, playing video games or hang out somewhere. I had to help my parents take my younger siblings to soccer practice or swim classes. This is probably one of the most important rules that I will always remember about leadership. Sacrifice by the leader helps gain trust and motivate others to achieve the shared goals. So I certainly hope to be able to apply the leadership skills that I gained during the past 20 plus years to this job and help the team succeed. So
that's a great example. That is really great. And I know, I remember, you know, in the early days of interviewing, that's the thing you struggle with the most. You feel like you have to have experience, but you really don't have experience yet. So this person applied it to growing up. And I think that that's really, it just demonstrates, you know, character. It demonstrates how their work ethic will be. So this is a really good example, and a good note that you don't have to always apply, you know, answer with the professional experience. So this is very good.
And this person, and look at his answer, and I'm thinking back, he was probably like a college senior. So he's probably just 21, 22 years old, right? But this isn't, he's shown that he had leadership experience for like 20 years. He's mature, right? And the example is very credible. So you just feel like it's such a mature person, dependable, and you can rely on that person. And needless to say, he was hired, and I think he's still in the finance group at Barclays. I think he might be up for VP this year. Yeah. So question number 2, describe your leadership style. Guys, this is also a real answer from our student. And this is one of our newer students who just joined the program a couple of weeks ago. And I use her example because it's really fresh on my mind. Another point to show everyone is everybody have these examples, right, in your back pocket. Sometimes you just don't think about it in a way, you know, using it as a leadership sort of example. So just dig through your inventory of good material, and everybody can come up with a good answer. So let's go over hers, right? I would describe my leadership style as empowerment. Instead of giving orders, I believe that fostering motivation, creativity, and the desire to improve oneself is what it takes to build a healthy and I can see actually my screen, and effective team. Yeah, thank you. As a peer counselor at the University of X, I am trained to establish trust and rapport with strangers quickly, understand their issues, and provide resources. This helps the student formulate feasible action plans that they can follow through. In my practices, I've discovered that the most effective way to make sure that students follow through with the action plan is to encourage them to work with me to find the most effective solution for themselves. This way, they take ownership of the plan and become accountable for their own actions. Moreover, some even come up with creative solutions on their own, a good way to help them persevere instead of giving up when there are challenges. I believe that this principle also applies to the workplace, and I think my experience in counseling as well as my knowledge of psychology make me a leader who focuses on empowerment of others around me to create a strong team dynamic. When each member of the team brings positive energy, work towards the shared goals and values, the team ultimately wins. Thoughts?
Very, very, I mean, that's key. And even in my present position, I find that that's a huge, of huge value to an employee is, when your supervisors give you the room to grow and to provide more ideas, and they value your opinion. It just makes you feel like it's your project. It's your company, if you will. And you just really take a more active role, and people are just they shine, and they will do so much better as a member of the team rather than just carrying out one particular function if you engage them that way.
Right. Yeah, I like her answer as well. And I think at the end, she subtly mentioned that, I focus on, I've done counseling, I have knowledge of psychology. So she is a psychology minor, right? So that is a little extra technical firepower, if you will, to say I understand how the human minds work almost, right? So people like that, I feel like would probably have higher EQ when they're in a team setting, right? So it's like a subtle sort of pat on her back, not in a bad way, but I think it's something to show I have the technical skill to work with people, right? Technical and people skill to work with team. So yeah, like this answer. Third one, have you failed as a leader, and what did you learn from the experience? And this is, again, a real example from our student. And I also want to, let's go over the example. And I think this story took us a little while, right, to eventually become the way it is.
It's kind of it's a loaded question.
It's a loaded question, right? And she didn't know how to answer, but her story was very good, right? And there was a little bit too much background in her original story, but we kind of really, work on the story, polish it up. So let's hear it now. Now, she's in charge of the China-US Spring 2018. So there's a mistake, I think. China-US 2018 Economic Summit, hosted by the Chinese Student Society at the University of Hawaii. So let's go back. She's a student member of that organization, but it's okay. Her story is not about a Chinese New Year gala, right? There's more to it. I was leading the outreach initiative, specifically finding guest speakers and arrange the logistics. The event was to take place in October, but I started the planning process early since June to allow myself sufficient time. I identified a speaker who's an expert in the field and has spoken at various conferences, including TED Talk. After establishing a connection on LinkedIn, we emailed back and forth. He agreed to come and speak, and I would provide him with details as we got closer to the event. Background of the story. I was excited about this, and my professor, who's a co-sponsor of the event, also thought that I made a good choice. As we got closer to the event, I emailed the speaker updates. Although I never got any confirmation, I thought it was fine. after all, someone with that kind of stature accepted the event and he's also busy, so I should not be bothering him too much. When the planning team and my professor asked me about the guest speaker, I felt very confident that everything will be fine. Finally, on the day of the event, we had a great student turnout, we had other panelists, and there were also food and drinks, so everyone was enjoying the summit. However, the clock ticked, 10, 11 noon, the speaker never showed up for his 2 p.m. keynote speech. I started to panic and try to call the speaker, and only to realize that I had his email and no phone number this whole time. I was so devastated, and I really just wanted to run away and hide my defeat and embarrassment. But I knew I couldn't do that. I need to figure out how to fill the keynote speaker gap so that the event can be successful. I decided to come clean with my professor and ask for his help. Thankfully, my professor was nice enough to jump in and deliver the speech. He's knowledgeable and funny, so students like him already. He filled the role and really saved me in the event. This was an embarrassing failure of my leadership. I didn't deliver what I promised, and it was because of my overconfidence, making assumptions without noticing the red flags, and not taking others' advice seriously. This taught me an important lesson in life. I learned that as a leader, I must take on additional responsibilities to ensure the team's success. Also, if something didn't go well, I must not run away. Rather, I need to acknowledge it and try to turn it around. So it's actually quite a loaded story, like you said.
That's a good one, because I've experienced that firsthand as well. So I understand. I can completely relate to the embarrassment and to feeling like inadequate. But that's the key to this whole story, is that never make any assumptions. I mean, I've done that too, where you know that people are busy, you feel like they're taking time out to come and to speak at an event, and you feel like they have such a high position, stature, they would never forget. But people can do it. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. So never make any assumptions. Always follow up and tighten up any loose ends. That's key to that story. That's the learning point from it.
Yeah. So,
and I have learned it personally. So,
well, I'm not jealous of having to listen.
Not for the keynote though, but for a speaker at an event. Yes.
Okay. So for her, right, our advice was, it's quite a long story, right? So if you don't keep the context relatively simple and straightforward, people will get lost, right? Mm-hmm. And so she spent quite a bit of time sort of framing the story, and then we cut that down. So now she has a story of, this is what was going to happen, and on the actual day, and we baked in a little bit of storytelling technique. So there's up and down of the story. And when she delivered it at the end, you actually kind of feel bad for her. It's like, oh my God, this poor kid. Like, just like you said, right? It's not like she didn't try, but it just, stuff happens, right? So when she was delivering it, and she was very genuine, and people actually feel like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for you, but I'm so glad that you learned. And again, it's relatable, right? It's the kind of mistake that we talk about, the kind of failure you experience at a young age. And it's something you can learn and move on, and hopefully never make the same kind of mistakes again. So, yeah. So these were the 3 examples we covered, and we're quite efficient, and we covered our leadership discussion today. And again, it's sort of like a weakest link for us in terms of all the behavior interviews. So I would just encourage everybody watching now or catching up later to really start thinking about your leadership experiences, prepare stories, and be mindful of those subtle twists that could be thrown your way, right? And I would also encourage everyone to start brainwash yourself that we do have enough leadership experience and quality, right? Don't feel like, because you could be your biggest enemy, right? When you don't believe you're a leadership role, then you would become your biggest enemy. And the more you practice the delivery of your story, the more natural it becomes, right? And I think it's sort of like self-reinforcing. I talk about my leadership confidently, hence I do have the real ability to lead. I think that will happen with more practice. Okay, so next week we're going to talk about strengths and weakness, how you avoid sort of posting and avoid certain things you shouldn't say, right? And I notice some of my students will say, my weakness is I don't have confidence, right? And that's a big thing too, big red flag that no employer wants to hire someone with no confidence. So for next week, we're also going to do it on Wednesday because it's 4th of July. So make sure you mark your calendar for next week. That's it from us this week. And Andrea, any other closing marks you have?
No, I just think this is fantastic. I mean, like you said, it's very good to prepare. I wish I would have known more of this when I was first looking for a job, but it's great to practice and to get these examples in your head and to be comfortable delivering them. I think this is fantastic. So I'm happy to be here today. I hope I shed some kind of insight and my experience was helpful. And that's it. Thanks for having me.
Very helpful. So thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for dialing in.
Good luck to everyone in your job search.
See you soon.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.